Shabbat Shalom, friends. It's really a privilege for me to be here. Especially, I want to thank everybody who helped in the production of the Haggadah. We in India have really enjoyed it. A lot of us who have downloaded it have been very, very blessed. All the hard work for those of you who have really taken time behind the scenes to come with this production, we just want to bless you in the name of the Lord. We're looking forward to stand along with the worldwide community in whatever way we are. Just want to thank you on behalf of our community, on behalf of our nation, and on behalf of the Lord for your hard work. And I pray Hashem will really bless you and honor you for everything that you do. I hope that each of you really had a great Haggadah, a Seder session with your families at your home. This night, the season is known as the season of remembering, especially the night of the Seder. It's called the night of guarding or remembering. We are bidden again and again throughout in the scriptures to remember, remember, and remember. I like the words of the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov said, to forget is the beginning of exile, but to remember is the beginning of redemption. I want to repeat that again. To forget is the beginning of exile, and to remember is the beginning of redemption. We are in the season of Pesach, and in this Pesach season, the Lord is commanding us to remember, remember, remember. Now, those of you who have gone through the Seder and gone through the Haggadah, the question we need to ask ourselves in the beginning is, why are some of the rituals done the way they are done? You've gone through the Seder. In the beginning, we have the urkats, the hand washing, which is done without the blessing. Then we have the karpas, which we take a piece of celery or any other vegetable and we dip it twice in the salt water. And then we had the yakat, which is the breaking of the middle matzah. And the question is, what makes these performance of these rituals so strange? Traditionally, most people say the karpas is done because we remember the salt water or the Yam Suf, the sea of reeds, the crossing. The middle matzah, the afikoman, we remember, we put it, some traditions put it on their shoulder. The hand washing is done without a blessing, but no explanation. And immediately after this, we get into the whole Magid, if you remember, if it is fresh in your mind till today. And the one who is taking of the preacher is basically, he yells out with the broken part of the middle matzah, and he says, this is the bread of affliction, or the bread of poverty that our forefathers ate in Egypt. Whoever is hungry, let him come and eat. Whoever is needy, let him come and celebrate Pesach. Now we are here. Next year, may we be in the land of Israel. Now we are slaves. Next year, may we be free men. So the question is, what is Pesach all about? What are we actually celebrating? Yes, he's commanding us to remember. But the question is, what is it all about in its root? In any festival, the question we need to ask is, what is the root of that festival? What is the underlying meaning of the celebration of that feast? So in the same way, what is Pesach all about? If you ask a couple of people or any Jewish person in the world that basically knows anything about Pesach, they would say Pesach is about redemption. It is about remembering the bondage from Egypt or the coming out of Egypt. So it's all about being saved from Egypt, being saved from bondage, and it's all about redemption. So these are the two basic highlights. So the question is, if that is the purpose of Pesach, if Pesach is all about redemption, why is Israel still today in exile? That's the question. If it's all about redemption, if it's all about the Geulah, then why is Israel in exile even today? Why is she's in exile today? Every Pesach, millions of Jewish families gather around the Seder table and they revisit the ancient story of redemption, the redemption from Egypt. And after expounding and going through the whole Haggadah, finally, when we come to the end of the Haggadah, what do we say? Lashana Habaha Yerushalayim. Next year in Jerusalem. But the question is, why the delay? What's going on with the delay? Why do we say that? What are we anticipating? We are anticipating that one day God will restore the Jewish people to their former glory. But the question is, why the delay? What's going on with the delay? And for the past 2,000 years, the Jewish people has been in exile. The sages come along, Chazal comes along and tells us that the reason for the 2,000 plus years exile is because of hate without a cause, sinat kinan, or baseless hatred. This is what brought the destruction of the temple during the Second Temple period. This is what basically that scattered the Jewish people to the ends of the earth, hate without a cause. And regardless of any preconceived notions that any rabbi ever tries to teach, the current exile of the Jewish people they are in does not have an expiration date. If you look, the first exile in the Babylonian exile, we all know very clearly from scriptures that it was a 70 period exile. But now, this exile, which the Jewish people are in, is basically an exile which does not have any expiration date. And the preconceived notions is that if we do the mitzvahs or the commandments correctly, so or we do that with the mitzvah, somehow we will speed up the redemption process. But that's not what the Torah says. The Torah says that, in his book, Shemirat HaLashon, guarding the tongue, the Chofetz Chaim, he explains that just as sinat kinam, hate without a cause, is what brought the destruction of the Second Temple, it is hate without a cause or baseless hatred that prevents the temple from being rebuilt and keeps Israel from exile. In other words, what the Chofetz Chaim is saying is that the reason why God has not restored the Jewish people from exile and rebuild the third temple is because of baseless hatred. Which means when the question is asked today, to everybody, who destroyed the temple? Who is actually responsible for the temple's destruction and the exile of the Jewish people? Every Jew or every one of us have to look into the mirror and say, I destroyed the Beit HaMikdash. I destroyed the temple. I did it. That might sound strange, because how many Jewish people who are living today in the 21st century, he or she destroyed the temple that was in existence 2,000 years ago? You and I were not even born. They were born in most of us were born in this century. So how can we say that we destroyed the temple? Hate without a cause is what keeps the temple from being rebuilt. Therefore, if a Jewish action and lifestyle, or if our action and lifestyle is not geared towards living a life of redemption and holiness, which is worthy of redemption and rebuilding of the temple, then our actions and lifestyle is what actually keeps our people in exile and the temple to be destroyed. Because if we lived a life that is worthy of redemption, redemption would happen. And if we don't live a life that is worthy of redemption, no redemption would happen. So it is with this that every one of us, every Jew, must look in the mirror and acknowledge that because of hate without a cause, the temple still lies waste and the Jewish people still stagger in exile. So the Chofetz Chaim explains that as long as hate without a cause resides in the heart of the Jewish people, there will be no expiration date for the current exile. And my friends, that is a very, very scary thought, because there is no promise of a glorious ending. That is really, really scary. So what the Chofetz Chaim is saying is that as long as hate without a cause resides inside the hearts of the Jewish people, not just Jewish people, for you and I also, there is no expiration date for the exile. And so while sinat kinam basically means baseless hatred, that's what it literally translates as hate without a cause. According to the many rabbis' understanding, the underlying cause of sinat kinan is actually directly against the leaders of Israel. I'll give you a few scriptural references. If we look in the Brit Kadashah in John chapter 15, verse 25, Yeshua says, this is to fulfill the words of the Tanakh. They have hated me with baseless hate. Sinat Kinan. Yeshua is actually alluding to the book of Psalms, where David HaMelech in two places, in Psalm 69 verse 5, where he says, more abundant than the hairs of my head are those who hate me. Sinat Kinan, without a cause. And in Psalms 35 verse 19, David says, see my enemies, they have become many and they hate me with violent animosity, hate without a cause. I want you to understand what David HaMelech is saying. David is not talking about Gentiles in this passage. He's talking about his fellow Jewish brothers who hated him without a cause. His own son dethroned him. Shaul HaMelech tried to kill him. David was a most wanted man by his own Jewish family. The leader, the king of Israel, had baseless hate displayed against him. When Yeshua says the words, they hated me without a cause, he's talking to the Jewish leaders and other Jewish people who despised him as a leader. So this teaches us that the root of Sinat Kinan is hate against the leaders of Israel. And according to Chazal, this is basically what caused the destruction of the temple. And the Kofetz Chaim comes along and explains that Sinat Kinan, or baseless hatred, is what keeps the Jews in exile. So with this in mind, the question we need to ask ourselves, we've just finished our Seders, why during the Seder, when recalling the redemption of Mitzrayim, we are not prompting our hearts to search for redemption from the current exile, which is the cause of Sinat Kinan. In other words, how can everyone say or sing Lashana Habaha Yerushalayim next year in Jerusalem, but fail to remove any baseless hatred in their hearts? We say next year we're going to be in Jerusalem, but yet I have the residual comets within me. I mean, that the thought of it, next year in Jerusalem, but I have the comets within me, is really crazy. We can't go before the king when we have filth or schmutz within us. Just look at our own lives. Many people say that we are believers in Messiah, but many believers, as believers, we carry offenses. Offenses towards one another, offenses to ourselves, bitterness, jealousy, comparison, envy, rejection, abandonment. Many of us deal with occult. Oh, you might say, I'm not. Rebellion is like witchcraft. It is occult. Fear, what others think about ourselves, assumptions, thoughts, evil thoughts, feelings, doubts. We walk around with these things and we say, next year in Jerusalem. How can we go before the king with all these things within our hearts? We can't go before the king when we have schmutz within us. It doesn't work that way. Yes, we come together. We celebrate the redemption of Pesach. But is that the actual meaning of why we do Pesach? No, that's just some of the highlights of what happens during Pesach. And that's not the underlying cause on why we do Pesach. Pesach is supposed to prompt us to do some searching. And what is the real message of redemption? In the Haggadah, we read the words, now we are slaves. Next year, may we be free men. The question is, who wants to be a slave? No one. Everyone wants to be free, right? Everyone wants to be a free man, a free woman. Then why in the Haggadah do we say, now we are slaves, next year may we be free men? The Haggadah is acknowledging that until the inner comets, which is related to the original sin of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, is extracted from our souls, we are not free men. We are still slaves. It is not only for the Jewish people, it is also for those of us who know the Messiah. The question is, many of us even sing the song, Ani ma ani ami be'emuna shalama. I believe in Messiah. We all say we believe in Messiah, but the question is, what do we do to bring the Messiah in our lives? Second Peter chapter 3 verses 11 and 12, it basically says that we need to live lives of holiness and godliness, and by doing so we hasten, or we shorten the times of tribulation, and we hasten the coming of the Lord. But we need to live lives of holiness and godliness. The question is, what do you and I do in our lives to hasten the coming of the Lord? I mean, the main reason why people's heart are not searching for an answer about how to be redeemed from the current exile is because we have overlooked the lost secret of the Seder. Everybody puts an emphasis on coming out of Egypt, the bondage of the hardships, but nobody actually many times don't focus on how Israel actually ended up in Egypt. That is why I asked this morning and evening for us, what is the root of Pesach? Because everything has to have a root. What is the root of Pesach? I just mentioned at the beginning that at the beginning of the Seder, we begin with a mysterious performance of washing hands without a blessing. Then we take the vegetable in salt water or in vinegar. We dip it 2 times. Then we break the middle matzah. Later that middle part becomes the afikomen, which is used as a dessert. The question is, why are we washing our hands without a blessing? We do it later during the Seder. We recite the blessings of the Netilat Yadayim. But in the beginning, there's nothing. We just wash our hands. We dip some parsley, we break some bread, and we continue saying that this is the bread of affliction. The question is, what's going on here? What is this karpas? The word karpas is derived from 2 words. The word karpas is first derived from the ketonet pasim. I hope most of us would know what it means. Anyone know what ketonet pasim is? Ketonet pasim, anybody heard about it? We find that reference in the book of Genesis, chapter 37, verse 3, where it says, Va'asa lo ketonet pasim. He, Jacob, made Joseph, a tunic. The tunic is ketonet pasim. So the word karpas is a reference to the coat of Joseph. We dip the karpas in remembrance of Joseph's brother, who dipped his ketonet pasim in blood. As I mentioned, karpas is made of 2 words. Pas is derived from Joseph's coat, pasim. The word kar, what does that mean? It's not the car which we drive, but the word kar, kaf resh, comes from meker, which literally means sail, means a sail. Joseph was sold. So we dip the karpas as a reminder of the sale of Joseph. And when his ketonet pasim was dipped in blood. So the root of Pesach, the root of going down to Mitzrayim, is not because of the miraculous deliverances and all the supernatural miracles that were performed. It's not about the bondage. The whole root of Pesach is of going down to Mitzrayim or going down to Egypt is because of the selling of Joseph. Why did Joseph's brothers sell him? The Torah says in Genesis 37 verse 4, Vayiru Ekav, his brothers saw that it was him whom his father loved the most. They were jealous, they were envied. So all of his brothers hated him. Sinat Kinam, hate without a cause. All his brothers hated him. So the underlying cause of Pesach is Sinat Kinam, hate without a cause. Chazal explains this was the climax of the destruction of the second temple. The Kofetz Chaim, as I mentioned here, he says this is what keeps the Jewish people in exile with no expiration date. So in other words, Sinat Kinam just didn't start 2,000 years ago. It started 3,700 years ago, maybe also close to 4,000 years ago with Joseph. This is amazing. You know what's so unique that is that in many Orthodox communities, there is a custom that right after the yakats, you break the middle matzah, which becomes the afikomen. We wrap it in a napkin, and what some people like to do, they toss it on their shoulders and they walk around, and some communities have a little show about it. They say this is how our forefathers went down to Egypt. I mean, the custom is based out of a Talmudic practice that when the temple stood during the Kurban Pesach, the offering of the Passover lamb in the temple, the people would toss the Kurban Pesach on their shoulders. And they would say, Tios, we are carrying our Kurban Pesach like Arab merchants. Now, as strange as this custom is, what in the world does Arab merchants have to do with Pesach? Let alone the Kurban Pesach. What is this strange custom that was done in temple times that even it translates itself to today in some of our seders by putting on an afikomen on the shoulders? And just like in the temple times, just like when we went down to Egypt. This is a very, very strange custom. But the question is, where does it come from? Like everything based in Judaism, it doesn't come, if it doesn't come from the Torah, you cannot trust it. The question we need to ask ourselves is, where in the Torah are Arab merchants described as carrying something relating to Pesach, which represents the descent of going down into Mitzrayim? We find that, yes, in Genesis chapter 37, verse 27, where Judah speaks up and he tells, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, the Arabs. He's our own brother, our own flesh. So here, the afikomen on the shoulder is all related again to the sale of Joseph. The karpas is all about the sale of Joseph. Chazal explains that the sin of selling Joseph was much more dangerous than the sin of the golden calf. In other words, the reason why Israel experienced this exile in the very first place is because of hate without a cause, that they sold Joseph to the Gentiles. That's what all of the sages and the rabbis agree to. Proof of that is basically found in the Torah. The Torah records, starting in Pasha Miketz, the interaction between Joseph and his brothers. The Torah doesn't call Joseph's brothers Joseph's brother or sons of Jacob. Rather, it refers to Joseph's brothers as Ha-Anushim, the men. Now, Israel in the Torah or in the Tanakh, in rabbinical writings, are called Ha-Adama, which refers to Adam. Adam, it refers basically to a person of potential or a complete man. The nations, the Gentiles, are always either called Anosh, which is frail, mortal. They are called also a Gever, but they're never called Adam. Only Israel is called by that name. But here in the Torah, in Pasha Miketz, when Joseph interacts with his brothers, the Torah does not call Joseph's brothers as Akav Yosef. He doesn't call them as Bnei Yaakov. It says Ha-Anushim, the men. Genesis 43. What does this mean? What this means is that basically Joseph's brothers cut him off in the eyes of God, and because of that, of their cutting off him in the eyes of God, because of hate without a cause, they were not related at all. So God allows the Jewish people to remain in exile because of this hate without a cause. And by calling Joseph's brother as Ha-Anushim, the men, indicates that Joseph's brother did not consider Joseph as their brother. This is why he was sold. How about us? How many times have we sold one another with our own words? So it's no coincidence that 2,000 years ago, at the climax, the apex of the Jewish prophecy during the Second Temple, that the sages explained that the destruction of the temple and the exile of the Jewish people is because of hate without a cause. It maximized itself 2,000 years ago, Sinat Kinam, that started with Joseph himself. I like what Solomon Hamelech, King Solomon, says in Ecclesiastes chapter 1 verse 9. He says, nothing is new under the sun. The yakats that is broken at the beginning of the Seder is a reference to the betrayal of Joseph, who is broken because of hate without a cause. We call the matzah the lechem oni, the bread of poverty or the bread of affliction. In the Haggadah, it is preserved mostly in Aramaic. Instead of saying lechem from Hebrew, it says lakama. Ha lakama ania. Lakama is Aramaic for bread, and there lakama has an aleph at the end, which represents God himself. It represents the divine quality of wisdom. So what the Haggadah teaches is that by partaking of the yakats, the broken middle matzah, we are somehow being able to be filled with wisdom. What is wisdom? Wisdom which represents the Shekinah, which is the feminine aspect of God, or the Ruach HaKodesh, or the Holy Spirit. There is a reference or an allusion to this, which we find in the book of Job 33, verse 33, where it says, Im ayin ata shamali ha karesh va alika kokma. Pay heed to me, hold your peace, and I will teach you wisdom. The word aleph there is to, in that verse in Job, means to teach. It means aleph, it represents aleph, it represents the divine wisdom. What does teaching and learning wisdom have to do with suffering, affliction, and poverty? By quoting Job, Job was an individual who was afflicted by God. When a person is afflicted, their afflictions, they are through their afflictions, they are able to identify with other people who suffer. When a person is afflicted, they are able to teach you things that help you to endure hardships. Listen to what it says in Hebrews chapter 2, verse 18. Because Messiah himself has endured being tested in the sufferings of his soul, he is able to come to the aid of those who are being tested. Later on in Hebrews chapter 4, verse 15, it says that we don't have a Kohen Gadol who is unable to sympathize with our weakness, but one who has been tempted in every way, but without sin. One who has known affliction and truly appreciates the value of deeds of the benevolence. So by eating Messiah's affliction, we are invested with God's presence. The question is, how is Messiah associated with matzah when Messiah was never there in Mitzrayim? Because Messiah is what we call Mashiach ben Yosef, the suffering Messiah that resembled Joseph. And it is through Messiah's affliction we are invested with God's presence. So at the Seder table, we raise up the lechem onim and we say, this is the bread of affliction. All who are in need, come and eat. Let's put that in perspective, the way Yeshua says it in John, the Gospel of John, chapter 6, verse 35. Yeshua said to them, I am the bread of life. Anyone who comes to me will not be hungry, and anyone who believes in me will never be thirsty. This is why the Haggadah urges all who are hungry to eat of the broken matzah. All who are hungry, let him come and eat, it says. Let him come and eat. This is called the bread of poverty. Yeshua in the Gospel of Matthew chapter 11 verse 29 says, accept upon yourself my yoke and learn from me. Learn, alaf. Learn from me, for I am humble and poor in spirit, and you will find a resting place for your souls. The word ani, poor in Hebrew, is one of the names of Mashiach in rabbinical material. It is based out of the passage of Zechariah chapter 9 verse 9, where Zechariah records, rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. O daughter of Jerusalem, behold, your king comes to you, righteous, having salvation. And then he goes on to say, who ani, who is poor, riding on a chamor, on a donkey, even upon a colt, the foal of a donkey. The Midrash comes along upon this passage in Zechariah and asks the question, why is Messiah called poor? Why is he being called poor? And the Midrash says, because he suffered all those years in prison while the sinners of Israel were mocking him. Based upon what the Midrash says, the poor one is understood to suffer on account of those who rebelled against God. The reference to prison is a reference to Joseph, who is despised and mocked by his brothers and was thrown in prison in Mitzrayim. Not because of anything he did, but because of God's divine providence. So since Joseph is viewed as a messianic figure, his faith points to the faith of the Messiah. In Ecclesiastes chapter 4, 13 and 14, King Solomon writes a lot of times allegorically, just like he did with the Song of Songs and the book of Ecclesiastes. In Ecclesiastes chapter 4, verse 13 and 14, Solomon says, a poor and wise youth who comes out of prison to be a king. This is a reference to Joseph, who was a youth who was sold to prison and came out as a wise king. The sages come along and say, understand that refer to Joseph, but the remes or the clue refers to Mashiach, who is going to be someone who is going to appear to be deprived of his dignity because he is going to be considered a prisoner in Judaism. The question quickly we need to ask ourselves, what do you think the Jewish people view Yeshua as today? They view him as a criminal who is sitting in Gehenna, hell at this point, suffering. And that's how a lot of Jews view Mashiach. Some people would say, I was taught that he was sitting at the right hand of the Father. You got to understand this contradictory statement of understanding Mashiach. In the Jewish world, he has to be viewed as a fugitive, as a criminal, because if he does not become like that, then he could not do his mission. So when people toss the afikoman on their shoulder in relation to the Arab soldiers who tossed Joseph on their shoulder, it teaches us that while Joseph may have went down to Egypt in chains as a prisoner, mocked by his brothers, he came out as a king to bring salvation to the Jews and to the entire world at that time. So too, Messiah was broken, sold to the Gentiles, went to the grave, which represents prison, and he was deemed as some type of failed Messiah, but he rose 3 days later with the keys of death to bring salvation to the Jews and to the entire world. Amen. It's a beautiful thing. The reason why we don't say a blessing during the hand washing, the urkats, is because what we are saying indirectly is that we are getting ready to do a crime and our hands are innocent of it. How do we bless Hashem for something like that? Because the blessings are only because of the good things God has given us. Joseph was sold. Messiah was sold. Our hands are washed. Nothing is said. There is no blessing for that because we are doing something that is not good. We are selling a righteous individual. Immediately after we wash the hands, the blood is dipped and we break the body. That's why there is complete silence on these three performances in the Haggadah, three of them. So Joseph, he was sold to Egypt. Messiah was sold to a form of Egypt in his day. In Sefer Zerubbabel, the book of Zerubbabel, the Midrash, there is a vision described over there. Zerubbabel saw the vision of a despised and a wounded man. And this despised and wounded man spoke to Zerubbabel in this vision. This is based on Arabic Midrash. Zerubbabel said, his words comforted me. And I asked him, what's the name of this place that you are in? He said, this is the greater Rome in which I am imprisoned until the end. I am locked up in Rome. This is why in the Talmud, it says in the Tractate Sanhedrin, Messiah is in Rome as a Metzora, as a leper. So in the book of Zerubbabel, it says, when I heard this, what Messiah was saying, that he is in Rome as a prisoner, I covered my face and I said, I heard you are Messiah, the God of Jacob. And instantly I saw the beauty and the salvation glowing from him. What the Midrash is saying, Greater Rome, is a reference to Christianity. All through rabbinic literature, Rome is called Edom, the name for Esau, which refers to Christians. What the rabbis and the sages acknowledge is that Messiah is going to be found in Rome, just like Moses was found in Egypt. His identity is going to be changed, just like Joseph. But that is where salvation is also going to come out from. So to a rabbinic mind, Messiah is there because he was condemned as a criminal. Joseph is there because he was condemned as a criminal. But what the Jewish people didn't realize is that they are just acting out their part in God's divine plan of salvation. Because when you go back, the purpose of the bread of affliction is to recall the affliction of Egypt. If you go back to Pasha Lek Leka, to the passage of the covenant of the paths, God told Abraham in advance, your descendants are going to go down to this land. God doesn't fill him on everything and why they are going there or how they are going there. They're just going to end up there. And when you read the story unfold through the Torah in various parashiyot, we see that God deliberately set everything up for the Jews to be a light. And every aspect on the page, every part of the page, we see the story of the Messiah being written. That it is his nature that one day he would be sold into exile in order to be a source of salvation for the entire world and to Israel. And the only way to come out of exile or come out of Egypt is through the Messiah. The only way to remove hate without a cause, sinat kinam, is through the Messiah. Friends, if that is true for the Jewish people, how about for those of us who believe in the Messiah, who claim that we are believers in the Messiah, but we still hold sinat kinam, we still have sinat kinam, hate without a cause, especially to our own brothers and sisters in the body of Messiah. This is why the Haggadah says, now we are slaves. Next year, may we be Bene Kurim, free men. I don't know about you. I'm not trying to be anybody's slave, not a slave to this world anyway. So friends, I mentioned earlier that a lot of people who sit at the Seder table would either sing or say Lashana Haba Yerushalayim, next year in Jerusalem. But nobody is doing anything to bring Jerusalem. Nobody is doing anything to go to Jerusalem or get to Jerusalem. What is this? What about us? What are we doing to prepare ourselves to get to Jerusalem? It is the city of the great King. We wait for Messiah. We look for Messiah. What are we doing to bring about the coming of the Messiah? That's the question we have to ask this morning. If we think that it'll all happen by itself, no, it doesn't happen by itself. Our actions can actually prompt a response from God. What are we doing? Do we just get up and sing songs and do a dance? What is our day-to-day activities doing? Let us remember the root of Pesach is all about remembering the sale of Joseph, which is a foreshadow of the Mashiach. Do you and I, on a day-to-day basis, do we transgress the goodness of God's mercy displayed in Mashiach through our sins, where we can crucify him over and over again, as it says in the book of Hebrews? We can't bring him as a sin offering, but we just use him. Do we just use him as get out of hell card because we have the grace of God? That's abusing the system. So we have to ask ourselves this morning, what are we doing to be the face of redemption? What are our actions and our words doing? Do we still speak like a slave, act like a slave, think like a slave. Remember, Joseph was sold because of baseless hate. Whenever you go the opposite of what Messiah has called you to do, you are in a way indirectly almost selling Yeshua back into prison. You're basically saying, I want to be a person in bondage. If you would ask anybody here, who wants to be in bondage? None of us would want to be in bondage. The Haggadah acknowledges that. You know what's the crazy part? It's right there in the front page of the Haggadah. It acknowledges that until the inner chametz, the inner leaven of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is extracted, people are not free men. Israel will not experience redemption. You and I will not experience redemption. How do we experience freedom? Yeshua says it in his own words. In John, the Gospel of John, chapter 8, 34 to 36, he says, I say to you, anyone who commits sin is a slave to sin. The slave does not remain in the house forever, only the son does. So if the son makes you free, you are free indeed. Free sons. Then understand in truth, you are free indeed. So friends, I would like to ask you, what are you doing that is preventing the coming of the Mashiach? Are our sins causing the delay? We learn the mystery of the Haggadah is that the karpas, the yakats, the breaking of the middle matzah, the urkats, the washing of the hands, all of that is a silent way of acknowledging the sale of Joseph, which is basically sinat kina, baseless hatred, which was a shameful thing. In most Jewish communities today, those things are largely overlooked. People go through the Seder like it's a ritual, only to hurry up to sing a couple of good songs next year in Jerusalem. But the question is, what are you doing in the meantime to speed up the process of redemption? How can they know that if they don't have the truth? You who have the truth, what are you doing to bring light to others around you? If you don't have the light within you, you have the light, but you're still in bondage. Then the world is not going to get better. The question is, do we also have baseless hatred among our own brothers? We claim ourselves to be believers in Messiah, but do we hold grudges, unforgiveness, bitterness to one another? Friends, remember, Messiah is about recognizing the lost secret of the Seder. It's almost like everybody forgets about the Messiah in the Seder. Another aspect of the Messiah is called, another word in Hebrew is called Mishken for the Messiah. Mishken is another synonym for the word poor, which is found in the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 9, verse 14 and 15, where King Solomon says, there was a little city with few men in it, and a great king came against it, besieged it, built great snares around it. Now there was found a Mishken, a poor man, poor wise man. He, by his wisdom, delivered the city, yet no one remembered that Mishken, that poor wise man. Just like no one remembers Joseph, whose wisdom saved the Jews. Just like a lot of people don't even know Messiah, who saved the world. The poor wise man, the Mishken, who came as Oni, as afflicted and poor. Friends, yours and mine, my actions are what will remember Mashiach. We are the face of Mashiach. We are the body of Messiah. Our actions demonstrate whether or not we want to see redemption in the world, or whether or not we want to see more prolonged suffering in exile. So this Pesach, remember the root of Pesach. It's not about the miracles. Yes, it is good to have the miracles, but the underlying cause of Pesach is remembering the sale of Joseph. We remember the sale of Mashiach 2000 years ago. So friends, we have a reason to rejoice because the sale came to bring life. yet Messiah may be found as a prisoner in Jewish thought. In the Christian realm, this is where salvation is going to come from for the Jewish people. So you and I are basically emissaries. We are the body of Messiah. We need to be the ones to speak about redemption. And how do we do it? By living a lifestyle that is worthy of it and not just talking about it. Just like I quoted previously, 2 Peter chapter 3 verses 1, 11 and 12, it says, living our lives in holiness and godliness, and thus looking for and hastening or speeding up the coming of the day of God. So I urge you, all this Pesach season, this Chag HaMatzot, really search for any residual chametz or leaven within you. Search and ask the Mashiach, ask the Messiah to help extract it from out of you, so that you and I may really be presented as unleavened bread before the King. May you all have a wonderful holiday. May you all have a holiday of growth. May you all have a holiday of redemption from exile, a holiday of memory, because in the memory lies the redemption. Chag Kasher Samayach. Amen.
Joseph, thank you for Nishtanah today. What a prophetic word. You have given us so much to think about. And I know that you are have to rush because you have services tomorrow morning. And throughout this broadcast, we put the website. Pastor Joseph, can you just maybe issue an invitation to those who are watching? I understand it is 9 a.m. in the morning.
Yes.
It's like a full day. Your service is full day. Can you just give a quick word so people know about your services, how to stream them? We are sharing them. We need to support this. Go ahead.
We live stream every Shabbat at 9 a.m. It is streamed through Facebook and through YouTube on Kehilat Bethlehem, 9 a.m. India time.
Amen. Amen.